Welcome back, CSC 235. This will be ex5 state dropdown. Now, we've already done a state dropdown in ex3, and here's ex3 that I'm looking at, our form. And if you remember, when we did our form, we just put in a couple states. We just put New Jersey, PA, New York, Delaware, Maryland. We put close states. Why did we just put a couple? Well, it's a lot of HTML. Even in here, this whole section here, if we had to put 50 states, we'd have to be typing all this stuff and copying, pasting, and doing all these different things here. So we kind of did it close states for now. But instead of doing all of those in HTML, since we've been learning about loops, and we've been learning about loops that we can actually plug in HTML, there should be a way where we could just plug in this stuff into a page so we can have a nice loop generate a drop-down of 50 states. Not only can you generate 50 states, you could generate years. Maybe you want to put month of birth, and you could generate a list of January through December, and people could choose that. Instead of typing in things like we were doing, typing in our date for our birthday, for that thing for 21, we could choose our month, we could choose our day, we could even choose our year, and we could have drop downs for that. And even in some cases, we could use if-else statements to say, okay, if it's February, there's only 28 days or something like that, or 28 to 29, whatever it is, depending on leap year. Or if it's September, there's only 30 days, or if there's August, there's 31 days, and so on. So there's lots of things you could do, but I don't want to get caught up in the weeds too much doing that, but I do want to actually work with this state dropdown and maybe throw it back into our exercise, and then we'll even have a little challenge where you could do a year dropdown and even reverse it too, just to work with loops a little bit. Now, we're just working with a for loop, but again, what we're going to do here is actually just create a dropdown. Now, we don't have to do it in ex3. You could just start it from scratch and just throw it on your page. We'll just do that and do like a little quick exercise. And I'll even show you where to get a array so you don't have to type the whole array of states, because you will want to work with an array of states. But here's a little hint. When you work with dates, you don't have to have an array of dates. You could just start at a certain date, 1920, and go to 2020 or something, depending on who's going to be using your dropdown of their age or something, or when they were born. I guess a 2-year-old may not be using a dropdown, but you could certainly use up to the current, date or something. But anyway, let's focus on the state dropdown. So what you're going to do is for ex5 to create something like this. Now let's just look at this first. Here's option value. Now we can have the first state showing there. We don't necessarily have to have select, but we can. You could have select there if you want. And then we'll put them in alphabetical order. So what we have to do is find an array or a list of all the states, and then we have to plug them in, and we're going to need an option element. We don't need a select element because we'll put that in first, and then we'll just plug in an option element, but we'll need a value, and then we'll need an inner HTML. Sometimes I'll use text content, but we could use inner HTML too, since we've been using that. So this is the value that gets sent to a form or whatever. Now, we don't have to make the whole form. We'll plug this into our existing ex3 form eventually. But right now, we're just going to do a quick exercise, ex5. We're going to do a drop down of all the states. So let's get to it. Let's go to create an HTML CSS and call it 235 and call it ex5. Since we were working on ex4 through A, B, C, D, and all that. Call it ex5 and just call it state dropdown. If you just want to do DD, it's fine, and just put your initials. All right, I'm going to get rid of this form right now, and this doesn't have to look good or anything. We're just going to have a dropdown. That's it. So let's get rid of this hello world, and let's get rid of all this stuff down here up to body. And then what we'll put in here is we'll just put a select menu and a label for. So let's start that off. Let's put select and hit tab. And we have an ID name. It's asking for an ID name. So I'm going to put ID equals state. And all our option values are going to go in here. So let's just put a comment. And well, actually, HTML comment. And we'll just put dynamic content goes here of the states. So we'll put that in there. So that's where that's going to go. So if you look at your HTML, you'll know that dynamic content has to go in there. Select name, we'll call that state as well. And I think that's all we need to start. There's a drop down. Now we don't have anything first, anything like that. And if you want to put a label in here, you could put label, and I'll hit tab, and it'll do label 4. And what do you put in there in the quote? You put in the ID name. So it'll be label 4 state. When I run it, I don't see anything there because I didn't put anything here. And I'll just put choose your state, choose state. We'll just do that. Okay, so we'll just have something like that. That's all we need. Now there's nothing showing up in there because we don't have anything in there. Remember, we're going to have option value, and then we're actually going to have something in there. So we're going to have to generate an option HTML element. So we're going to review some of this stuff. All right, so let's go back to our script. And what are we going to want? Well, first thing we're going to need is an array of states, because we're pulling it from an array. We're not just using numbers, so we need an array of states. Okay, let's start typing. Let's do const states equals, and let's just start typing all the states. Okay, we don't want to do that. There's got to be a states array somewhere. Let's go find one. States array. GitHub has one. JavaScript array of states. Here's one. And I saw this one first, and it had American Samoa, and I'm like, I know that's something, a territory, but it's not really a state. So I think someone actually did an updated one here in the GitHub in there. So you could use this. So I'm just gonna copy all the states. Now they have single quotes in here. That's fine. I'll copy this. I think this is a proper one. It doesn't have territories. It doesn't have DC. So I'll copy that. Now I already have the brackets. That's why I'm copying this. You could copy the whole thing if you want, but I'll copy that. That way, it's not cheating. It's just we don't feel like typing that. And we'll just put that in there. All right, there's our array of states. And you could call it states array or something if you want, if that's easier. All right, so we're going to pull from this. So let's do a loop for, and put our parentheses and put our conditions. I equals, remember we're starting at 0 because 0 would be the first one. Now, if you'd want to put select in there, I guess you could do that as well. So it could start with the first one in the list. Depending what value would come up, we'd probably have to put something to say if you selected select, you need to also choose something if you're not changing it. But actually, let's do that as a first one. That'll give us 51, but that'll show up first. So I equals 0, that'll start at 0, so select will be there, semicolon, and then I is less than, and it's coming up here, states.length. So it's already, look at this, it's doing this for me, states.length. So you could put 51, but we're going to do states.length because that's how many are in there. And then the I++. So it's giving me a hint here. So we'll do less than states.length. We'll type it ourselves. And then we'll put a semicolon and then put I++. And now we need our curly braces. And in here is where we're going to generate our stuff on our page. Now, this is already here, but what we're going to generate is the stuff that's going in here. So we need an option, we need a value, and we also need inner HTML. So let's go to it, go back to our script. Let's create something that's called state. Let's just put let state equal states with the index number. So that'll basically represent one of the states. So state, instead of just using that, we're just using state will represent one of the states. So that'll get used to be plugged in somewhere. It'll be an option value, it'll be whatever. Then we have to generate what? We have to generate an option element. So let's generate an option element. So first, where are we going to get it from? Or where are we going to put it? Well, it's in an ID named state, so everything's going inside here. So this will be an append child that's going inside here. Remember we were doing append child? So this will be a child of this. So we should be able to append child to that. So we got to get this ID. So let's get the ID. Let's do document. And we could use variables to shorten it, but let's just do this first. Then we'll see if we need to shorten it. Document.get element by ID. And then the ID we're going to use is going to be state. Again, not the variable, but the ID state. And then we would append child. Now, what are we going to append? State? That's not an element. So we don't have our element yet. Let's just put element in here because we don't have it. So we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's okay. We don't have an element here yet, but that's what we're going to do. But before we append child, we have to create our element. So we didn't create our element. So let's go here and create our element. We could just call it option and say let option equals or be assigned to, and it's actually coming up here. And we could do document.create element because we're creating an element, and the element we're creating is option. So it's actually showing up right here. Now it's giving me hint. It's confusing me here. It's putting stuff in here like a ghost, but it's not really doing that. So let me put it in myself. Create element, and then I'll just do option myself. And there it is. I'll put my semicolon. So we have a variable that represents whatever state comes through the array. Then we have a variable that represents creating the element option. Now we didn't fill up option yet. Right now it's just going to make option that many times. Let's just run it. And I'll open it up in a new window. And let's just see what's here. Sometimes it's good just to inspect and go in the body and dynamic content. So it didn't put anything in there yet. So we don't have anything in there yet. It didn't write anything to our page because we're appending child element. What if we put option here? Let's just see. Let's just refresh. There we go. So now it has all these options in here. We don't have values, we just have options. So that created all our elements. So we created our elements, but now we have to put stuff in there. So that should be easy enough. We should be able to do option.value. It's actually coming up here. Option.value equals state. So it'll put in that value as state. So we'll just put equals. So from that element, it's giving it a value of state. And let's just see what happens here. Let's refresh it. And it actually put in all the states. Now it's not showing up there. They're not showing up in the dropdown. Why is that? Do you know? Because there's nothing showing up here. There's nothing physical in there. You can select something, but you don't know which one it is because it's not visible. You're only getting the values. You're not getting the inner HTML or the text content. So let's put in our HTML, our inner HTML, and let's just say option.innerHTML equals state. So it'll be the same thing. And then we should just be able to append that. So it will have a value. When we append the child, it will have a value of state because that's an attribute. Value is an attribute. And then it's going to use this property of inner HTML, and it should plug that in there. So let's see what happens. And I'm just looking at this. So that looks good. There's all our states from there. That was a lot easier than having to type all this stuff in. You know, remember, this is a lot of HTML to type. It's a lot of stuff that you could screw up. You'd have to know what order they're in. So just by borrowing an array and pulling from that array, you can do that. So that wasn't that hard to do. I'm not sure why this isn't working here. For some reason, this is, oh, that works now. Just had to refresh it. So that's all we need for that. Now, what I'd like you to do, so for ex5b, another B here, what you're going to do is you're going to plug this code in to your ex3 that you did previously. And then, you know, I'll see it. You could put a link to it when you do ex5b. You could just put your REPL of your original ex3, but it'll have the state list. So instead of having just the 5 states or whatever the local states I did, Maryland and Delaware, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, you could have all the states in this list by doing that. So plug that in. And again, what we're trying to do is make it more relevant so that you can actually save time and plug that in. And then for a challenge, what I'm going to have you do is just generate a date list of years. So if you wanted to put a date of birth, you could just choose from anywhere from 1920 to 2020. Now, nobody from 2020 is going to be using that dropdown, but that's a good place to stop. And you can do it in forward order or backwards order. So that's what we're going to do for EX6. And I guess it could be like a challenge as well. Maybe I'll do a challenge. You just do it in reverse order. But what we'll do next is just kind of take this code and fork it and make it into EX6. And let's see if we could just do some dates. Should be easier because we don't have to use an array because we could generate numbers down here. So we would still have this option that we're going to do because we still want a select menu. So we'll still use this. We'll still use the code. So you could use this code for EX6. But for EX5, this is all you have to do. For EX5B, I want you to take this and put it back into EX3 and send me a REPL link for your updated EX3, or even just say, hey, it's updated. You could just do that, and I could go look at it as long as you did the previous EX3 form that we did. So make sure you do that. So coming up in EX6, we're going to just be doing some dates, and you might know how to do that already, but I'll go through it quickly.